don't have to do that.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Gorilla Sports Off Ice. Jesse Montano and Meghan Angley. This episode is brought to you by our great friends over at Trusted American Mortgage. Trusted American salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you, yes, you, lower your interest rate and get a lower monthly payment. Go to trustedamerican.com and see how much money they can help you save today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hello, welcome in Gorilla Sports Off Ice Friday. It's Friday. Avs game tonight. Avs last game before the Four Nations break, Megan. Big win for them last night in Calgary, and they'll be heading just across the province up to Edmonton to take on Connor McDavid and the Oilers tonight. We will have some post-game content for you guys coming tonight after the game. But, Megan, first of all, how you doing today?
I'm doing so well. Excited for this pod. I think we're digging into some interesting topics. There's one more game before the Avs head into the break, so I have some excitement around how they're going to close this one out. New article just went out.
That's
also
right.
Excited about that. So just feeling really good, and I get to go see the Colorado Eagles tomorrow. Vibes are high.
I was going to say, it's a great day around here to be Meghan Angley. Let's talk about the piece that did just go out 6 minutes ago from you. We teased it a little bit on last night's show, but Meghan, you spoke beautifully in the article about the way that Jared Bednar has been able to blend an old school kind of like, rough and rugged hockey approach with this very new age analytics driven mind. I
think when I see criticisms of Bednar, I see them come from two different places. There's a criticism that he's too stuck in his ways, that he's too married to sometimes the old school way of thinking. And then I think sometimes I feel people just don't trust the strength of the grasp that he has on his team for what their strengths are and how to play into those. And I think that his willingness to adapt as he's grown into an NHL coach is how he has found success at every level. And I think that's something people gloss over a little too quickly. And it feels unfortunate too, because when you look at the team that he inherited, the 48-point season, this wasn't served to him on a platter. He was given some elite superstar talent to work with, but it didn't come together immediately. The organization had to make some difficult choices around what the core even was going to be. And so a lot of that required a coach to steady things during the highs and the lows and the sting of second-round exits. And I think born from that is an identity that they lean back to during difficult times, to include lots of this season. But inside that too is a coach who's willing to adapt to the changing team. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot this season. Some of it's been out of his control in terms of what he's been able to do with personnel. And I'm excited to see coming out of the Four Nations break where this really shines for Bednar, especially knowing he's sitting down and working on some team projects. I wanted to shout him out for that too, that he's so dedicated to his craft and constantly wanting to improve his team that he's going to take this break to sit down and study film and review the analytics of his team to see what this group is and how he can better play into their strengths so they can create more offense. And I wanted to give him some credit for that and how we've gotten this far, because I think since the 2022 team, people are too quick to say that team was just constructed so well and with so much talent that they kind of take away from the coaching side of it. But coaching brought them there in the first place because they dug themselves out of a deep hole after that 2016-17 season.
Well, and your point about the first season that he came to Colorado, the roster, to your point, wasn't good. It was an old group that was somehow right up against the cap, but not any good. And I think the part that also, we talk about, when we talk about, he didn't have a great team, but came in at the last possible second to get ready for a training camp. And not only, it wasn't just any training camp, it was a training camp where all of your top players were gone playing at the World Cup. So he had to go through the first 2 weeks with this new team that he just joined 2 weeks before, without most of his top guys. Then they trickled back depending on how quickly they were eliminated from the tournament. The uphill climb that he faced from that first moment he was brought on board to where he took the team, say 18 months later, that's another thing where it's like, we haven't given him enough credit for, they had the 48-point season. Horrible. That's what everyone talks about. They have not missed the playoffs since. And, when you're talking about changing rosters and changing, front offices and things like that, the consistent has been Jared Bednar through all of it.
Right. Navigating a different cap era. I think we're going to see that change in the years to come with the cap increasing, but following the 2022 season, everyone's been at the mercy of that cap ceiling, and it's been hard for teams to stay complete. And that's what I think the Avs have faced a lot this year. And to Jared Bednar's credit, he has embraced new age things like the use of analytics more than any coach that I'm aware of. And you just don't take it from me, take it from his players. It is almost unheard of the way in which he merges these two things and boils it down to a language that his players understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really want to give him credit for, because not any coach can do that, right? That's a good analytics department, but it's a good coach that can make that into a language that his players understand.
Yep.
And care about.
100%. 100%. If you want to read more in depth about everything that we were just talking about, and like I said, an outstanding piece, Megan, on Jared Bednar and the blend of truly, what you and I have kind of discussed privately off air. In my opinion, I'm not trying to, homer too much here, but kind of pioneering a new style of coaching here, where it is this. We've had instances with Jared Bednar where it's like, oh, this is an old school,
it'll catch you off guard.
Yeah, rock'em sock'em type coach. But then he also, so seamlessly blends it with everything that you were just talking about. So go check it out, girlsports.net. No paywalls, nothing like that. Go check out the article right now. Well, Megan, what we're going to talk about here on the show is we are 57 last night, or was it 56 last night? So we got into this conversation.
Right, we actually did this exact
and
thing.
I can't remember if we decided
air.
that last night was game 56 or if
56.
Last night was. Okay,
yes.
Game 57 here tonight, but they are heading into the Four Nations break. Megan, it's the first time that we've seen a break of this length in nearly a decade in the NHL. There's some of the league's superstars who have never gone through something like this. So it's been a while since we've had a break quite like this where the league does just fully stop, and you and I thought we'd also take a break and take some inventory of what we've seen so far from the Avs. But I am going to small minor detour here. Minor detour. And I just want your thoughts on it. Vaguely Sober did mention in the chat, hey, I'm going to see Greg Wyshynski's post on Blue Sky about Mikko. So I just went and pulled it up real fast. And this was something that I had actually heard people talk about within days of the trade. Was that, is there the potential that if Carolina gets, a few weeks into the Mikko Rantanen relationship, and if they feel like they can't extend him, would it be possible that Carolina would try to flip him again to recoup some assets and maybe flip him to a team who would be fine with just a straight rental, or maybe a team that would have a better chance of being able to get him re-signed? And it does sound like, according to Greg Wyshynski, there is a little bit of buzz starting to emerge from some Carolina insiders that maybe he might be back on the trade block here before March 6th. That to me is not at all an indictment of the slow start that maybe he's gotten off to there, but maybe more of a sign that Carolina does not feel like they are going to be able to retain Mikko Rantanen and get him signed to an extension. You and I didn't talk about this on air last night. I'm of the opinion that if I'm Mikko Rantanen, there's zero chance I'm re-signing with a team in season right now. I'm not saying that if I'm Mikko Rantanen, I wouldn't maybe eventually decide on the Carolina Hurricanes, but I would at least go out there and see what is on the open market for me.
Yeah, it feels like what got him into this situation in the first place was this assessment of his value. And there was this number of, right, this is what I believe the market value is. This is what I'm comfortable with within the team. I believe this is a team-friendly number.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in still getting traded and not being able to see eye to eye and get that on the same page, then you have to. You almost owe it to yourself because you took that gamble on yourself and your value as a player. Then you need to see it through.
Yeah, I agree. And to that point, okay, well, if you really think you're worth that and you think you have the numbers, you and your team think you have the numbers and the data to back that up, go get it. Like, I am fully in support of Mikko Rantanen going and getting the bag this summer and signing for $15 million somewhere. I hope he does. I don't know if I was a GM, if I would give him that, but no, I'm with you. You've already been traded off the team that drafted you, 10 years that you played there. Yeah, go see what's out there. But it does sound like there's maybe this much more steam behind the could Carolina flip him before the deadline if they get him in here and realize that they won't be able to get him signed. So that's something that you and I will keep an eye on here over the course of the Four Nations break. There is no roster freeze. Teams are going to be able to wheel and deal as much as they'd like here over the next 2 weeks. We'll keep an eye on Carolina, see if one, they can eventually get something done, but two, if they feel that they cannot, do they flip him or do they keep him as the rental and risk losing him for nothing like they did Jake Gensel last year?
Yeah, I think that was even what created the panic of some of these moves happening so far in advance of the deadline is the concern that they won't be able to have as much command over what type of return they get, and they're at the mercy of the deadline. So they bought themselves some time. But now that a few of the dominoes have fallen, I think other teams are feeling a sense of urgency, and I think it's created a little bit of an overall panic. I think that's even why the Mikko Rantanen trade happens when it does, especially knowing that there were other teams, other trades on the table at the same time, kind of influencing this. Yeah.
And it's part of the reason that I don't know. I said this on Edmonton radio yesterday. I get why people were confused and why Mikko Rantanen was so caught off guard by the trade when it happened. But I actually think that was good business from Chris McFarland. With every day you got closer, Mikko Rantanen and his camp got more and more leverage, and the return that you were going to get from teams went down by just a little bit with every passing day. Definitely with every passing week, the return that people are going to be willing to give you is going to go down, because of the potential situation that we're seeing playing out here already with Mikko Rantanen and Carolina maybe saying, oh, shit, we maybe just gave up Marty Netjes for a rental.
Yeah, I do think, too, there is a real strategy with the minute that murmurs of the Mikko trade train.
Yeah, the trade train.
Yeah. Get out there. You can't get that back. And that, I think, does decrease Colorado's leverage when teams know that it's out there. So I understand the timing a little bit more in hindsight.
For sure. We'll keep an eye on Mikko Rantanen's situation in Carolina here over the next few weeks. But hey, it's not the Avs issue anymore. All right, let's talk about the Colorado Avalanche. We are heading into the Four Nations break after tonight. Still one more game for the Colorado Avalanche tonight up at Edmonton, taking on Connor McDavid and the Oilers. But Megan, you and I are going to kind of treat this as if that game is already come and gone and we are into this break. And just take some inventory. This has been such a strange season for the Avs. And truthfully, I am of the opinion, I get it. I get people's frustrations, and this team, has gone through stretches where they have not looked like a Stanley Cup contender. You're making big trades. You move on from Mikko Rantanen. I get it. I get where people, have some frustrations. I look at this as they're in a pretty good position given everything they've dealt with this season. 10,000-foot view. We're going to dive into more specifics. What have been your just kind of, like I said, broad strokes thoughts on the Avs this season up to this point?
I've maintained a confidence in them as a team. I've also felt that I haven't seen a full picture of what this team is going to look like, it was supposed to look like as it was drawn up in the offseason. And I'm pleasantly surprised with the direction it's taken. They probably couldn't have anticipated Mikko Rantanen trade and Netjes in return. So in the ways that it's been surprising too, I think will emerge as an important part of this team's story for the year. And I'm ultimately, between the goaltending overhaul, which is another thing, the goaltending you started the year with, not the goaltending you're going to finish with. 27 different forwards, 42 different players have appeared in games for the Avs. To your point, all things considered, I'm pretty happy with where they are. And digging into the numbers, spoiling a little bit there, I'm more happy with the team's performance. There are areas of improvement, and there are things that I think get overemphasized. We talk about how this team actually feels pretty close to complete. It's not fully complete, but when you look at the construction of the back end, it actually influences the performance of the forward group. And, maybe even just addressing that in the immediate, it all starts to look better instantly. And so I feel pretty good about where this Avs team is positioned, especially knowing that this is an aggressive front office, especially as demonstrated this year, that is not finished.
Well, and not only is not finished, but feels like they've got a really good understanding of what the team needs. It's something that, and again, I'm not even going to tell people that they're wrong to criticize Chris MacFarland if for the Mikko Rantanen trade or coming into the season and with the two goalies that they did have. People are allowed to feel however they want. You and I talked about it on a pod earlier this season that I go back to last year, Ryan Johansson, Tomas Tatar. Those were two players. The Johansson one, everyone was a little bit, I don't know if he fits, but everyone also understood he's something very different than what you have. So I think we all kind of understood the reason why they made that gamble. And then, they bring in Tomas Tatar, who you think, wow, here's going to be some nice punch in the bottom half of the lineup. Neither of those players worked out, and neither of them finished the season with the Avs. Chris MacFarland was aggressive in getting those players out and replacing them with players that he felt could have a real impact and get this team closer to winning a Stanley Cup. I agree with you, Megan. I don't think the way this team is currently constructed, they need a lot to go right for them to go on a deep run, but I don't think it's a need for this massive overhaul to get them where they need to go. I think it's a couple tweaks here and there, a healthy player coming back in the lineup here and kind of moving guys down, and suddenly you feel a whole lot better about what you've got. And where I do think people should have a bit of confidence in Chris MacFarland is that he has shown, to your point, he's willing to make aggressive moves. He understands that this team is in a competitive window. Okay. Elliot Friedman was breaking a Canucks trade, but it's seems like it's a relatively minor deal here. Mark Friedman for future considerations.
Okay.
Extremely minor. But, Chris MacFarland is evaluating this team the same way that everyone else is, and he has shown a willingness to say, goaltending's not good enough. We got to upgrade both spots. What did he say after the Mikko Rantanen deal? We aren't deep enough. This team is not deep enough to win the Stanley Cup. So we made a change that's going to give us more flexibility and add some depth. He's going to be aggressive in putting this team in position to try to win a Stanley Cup. To me, not all that different from what we saw Pierre Lacroix do here for years. And he's got a banner hanging in the rafters.
Yeah, I think what has happened this year, I don't know where this team goes in the playoffs this year because there's still so many uncertainties looming, from Val Nichushkin's sustained health coming out of the Four Nations break to what is going on with Gabriel Landeskog.
Mm-hmm.
But the overhaul just with goaltending and getting Blackwood signed to an extension changed my opinion about their window. It feels more open than it did to start the year. And that is with the core still being almost said Rantanen, almost started there.
Woo!
McKinnon, Carr. There's a Taves in there. You still have Lehkonen. You still have Val, which, that's for better or for worse. The term on that contract following the Stanley Cup is, I think, what has influenced, too, a lot of their roster planning for the future. But all that in mind, the Blackwood goaltending extension changed my opinion about where this organization's going after this season in a positive way.
Well, and look, Chris MacFarland's making a big gamble here on the fact that he's going to be able to take the extra roster flexibility, the extra cap flexibility, not just right now at the deadline, but into the offseason and do something with it, do something meaningful. And I do think you're right, Megan, that it's with the intent of extending the window and, keeping. And I'm with you. It was the one thing that I really felt about the Mikko Rantanen deal that I didn't like at the time was you're removing a core piece, and the recipe for sustained success has been keep your core together at all costs and make the adjustments around that you need to. But what Chris MacFarland has said is we are keeping our core. Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar are the core of this team. And then you have maybe, tiers, rings outside of that. Devon Taves, Val Nichushkin fit into one. If Gabe Landeskog is able to come back, he's, in the. But they're saying we're going to keep the two, what we think are the two best players in the world at their respective positions. And we're going to give a more complete roster of good quality talent instead of having some real great players at the top and then having to skimp in net and maybe, shuffle this bottom group around. Or no, they're saying with the move in net, we're solidifying in net and we're giving ourselves more flexibility to build a more complete team going forward.
I think too, where I have to give Chris MacFarland some credit for making an incredibly difficult decision, because I imagine he would have liked for Mikko Rantanen to still be a part of this core. And I also imagine that Chris MacFarland had an idea that the cap was going up even more than any of us expected.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know some people thought, well, then could you really not have agreed on that number? Could you really have not acquiesced just a little bit? And I think it's the bottom line of the window outside of this year and their ability to build the roster around the edges hindered on this, on what Rantanen's future contract would be and how it would affect the team and the makeup of the other contracts to include a Cale Makar extension in the future. And I think he had to make that hard decision that keeping the core with a Rantanen a part of it might mean costing parts of building a championship team in the future. And that is at the expense of their window, and he couldn't afford it. And that's really a hard balance to strike, because Rantanen could also be a part of keeping that window open. But I think he had to make a cold, hard decision. And it's one that's only going to give them more options in the future.
I'm not anticipating this happens, just for the record. But wouldn't that be something if they found a way to bring him back here in the summer, if things don't, work out for Mikko the way that he was hoping in terms of what he can get dollar-wise and things like that, if they were to circle back around. Like I said, for the record, that is not on my bingo card. The odds of it happening aren't zero. They're not zero. Megan, we're not gonna, spend a crazy amount of time talking about each one and turn this into a 2-hour pod. But I do want to go through these 10-game segments, right? That's how Jared Bednar likes to evaluate his team. That's how we break down the pyramid with Chloe, who is behind the glass today. So she's a part of the show, just not on camera here today. Hi, Chloe. Double hand wave from Chloe. That's when we do the pyramids and all that stuff. So I thought it'd be fun for us to kind of go through and just say, where were they at after 10 games? Where were they after 20? Blah, 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 blah. Because despite our optimism, they're maybe coming off their worst 10-game segment of the season. So if it's all right with you, that's just kind of where I'd like to start. Games 1 through 10 for this group. Not the start that you wanted. 0-4 to kick things off. To start this year, including some really high-scoring losses. But they were able to kind of settle themselves after those first 4 games. And that was where I felt like there was the maturity starting to show through a bit, that this group is going to be able to get themselves, back in order after losing the first 4. They win the next 5, and they end up that first 10-game segment 5-5.
Yeah. And I'm going to spoil this a little bit, but
spoil it.
The segments I'm keying in on the most are the segment from games 21 to 30, and then the segment, 31 to 40, and then segment 41 to 50.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in like this recent 10-game stretch. It's the one just before it that I've decided is their worst, and the one just before it that I've decided is their best. And I'm just giving you advance warning that when we get to those, I want to spend more time on them because I want to compare them directly to one another. But going back to the first 10-game segment, 5-5-0, like you say, I think that honestly, like the first 20-game segment has a similar feel to it in that the overall result, they got wins probably where they
didn't deserve it,
or against all odds is maybe the word that I'm looking for, because they had to overcome 3+ goal deficits, and they had to overcome deficits early in games. And so that's actually a huge strength of this team, that they were able to pull themselves out of that rut game 1 through 20. Obviously, goaltending was the struggle. We know that. But when you look at the young players who stepped up, and a lot of the injuries and uncertainty with the lineup at that time in particular, right? This is Cal Ritchie, this is Nikolai Kovalenko, it's Ivan, Nikita Prishepov. That's what makes the opening 20 games kind of exciting for the Avs, that there's a little bit of grit to this team, and they're kind of this ragtag team of unlikely people. And I love what they did in those 20 games, but they also can't be married to the identity of the ragtag underdogs overcoming against all odds because they're the Colorado Avalanche.
Well, and so that was truthfully where I wanted to go with this first 10, and I'm glad you even likened it to the second 10-game segment as well, because for me, I was evaluating them very different
in the moment,
in those first 20 games than last night you and I talked about the fact after that first period, like nowhere near good enough.
Right.
Nowhere near the compete level. That wasn't the stuff that we were looking at in those first 10 or 20 games. Because there were so many injuries. You had no Lehkonen, you had no Val. I know you don't have Val right now, but and then you lost Miles Wood, and then you lost Ross Colton. And it was just, it didn't even feel fair to hold them to the same standard that we've come to expect. And Jared Bednar even said, like, the work ethic and the compete standards, we're holding them the same. But, like, look, let's be honest. We're not expecting the same results that we will be expecting, come February, March, April. And I just thought it's part of what has made this season feel so weird is that you got off to such a strange start. And to your point, there was such a rotating cast of guys in the bottom half of this lineup that we haven't even seen now for multiple months. And so it really did just feel like a completely different team, completely different season. But to your point, and to the point of what Vaguely's talking about here, that ragtag group kept them in the fight.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe where, going back to what we talked about off the top, Jared Bednar deserves some credit. And the leadership group of this team, the top players, deserve a huge amount of credit, because I love the way you put it. Against all odds, they found a way to come out of each of those first 2 10-game segments feeling pretty good.
Yeah. And I look at the power play around the games like 11 through 20 in that second month or so. This is probably the best we've seen it all season. It was surging. It was capitalizing nearly every chance. And that was headed up by the top guys. And so they took a lot of the team by the reins with the power play surging the way that it did. And that brought them a lot of success. And that's where even unlikely players on the power play also found ways to contribute. Casey Middlestat was contributing, especially in the opening 10-game segment. Ross Colton, another on the top unit. And so it was the leader stepping up, but it was also players like that stepping up. And so they do deserve a lot of credit. It's maybe even why, with criticisms of the power play, especially of the last 10-game segment, I give them some credit, though, on the whole of the season. When they needed it to be working the most, it did.
Yeah. And so those are the first 20 games where, like I said, it was really even a different evaluation process. For me, it was 21 to 30 was where there was a little like, oh boy, because you're talking about the goalies.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were starting to get into the point of like, is this going to get better? Like, how long can we write it off and say, we've seen Alexander Giori, he was an all-star last year, led the league in wins. He can play well enough for them to win games. When are we going to see the version of him that we saw in the playoffs after game 1 against Winnipeg, where he went on to play outstanding?
Yeah.
For the rest of round 1 and through round 2, we started to have to question, what are we looking at here? And then there's the Tampa game.
Yes.
On November 25th, that, in my opinion, really kind of set the table. The goaltending trades technically came in the following 10-game segment, that 31 through 40.
Right.
But to me, the 8-2 loss on November 25th was kind of where this season, if you're looking for like a breaking point, that was it, where we turned the page from, all right, we're going to excuse away the goaltending, there's injuries, there's whatever, to you need to do something to get this right here.
Yeah, because not unlike what we've seen where the results have been really high and really low, the reasoning behind it really went back to goaltending at that time. The team would be doing a lot of the right things process-wise, and they would get poor results.
Mm-hmm.
They would get the loss. They wouldn't get the necessary points in the standings, and it would be on the heels of a really significant win.
Yeah.
And so there was this really deflating to morale issue that was creeping up on them, that they couldn't string together wins. And so the wins were met by crushing losses that were crushing their spirits.
So let me just expand on that a little bit, because you are 100% right. The road trip where the 8-2 loss came was the very end of what had been a very successful road trip. You had gone into Philly on the Eric Johnson 1,000 game celebration night, come out with a exciting win. You went into Washington, one of the hottest teams in the league still, but especially at that time, and you eke out a 2-1 win. Then you go into Florida, playing the defending Stanley Cup champions, and you come away with this incredibly exciting 7-4 victory. And you're feeling good. And then you go into Tampa, and you cannot get a save from either goalie. And the loss was so bad and so morally crushing that it was difficult to even feel good about the fact that you just went 3-1 on the trip, knocking off the top team in the league, the defending Stanley Cup champion. At that point, the Flyers were a little bit of a surprise team around the league. Like, you were coming off 3 great wins, and it all, you didn't even care because of how sideways it went in Tampa Bay, and just what a sobering reminder it was of the situation you were dealing with in net.
Yeah, it truly created a trauma response in the team that on any given night, they had no idea what to expect in net. And so it changed the way that they played in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
They were overcompensating for a lack of trust in their goaltending, and it led to self-inflicted mistakes. They were in their heads too much, and to, going back to crushing their spirits, it led to a lack of trust that I don't think was going to be repaired. And that was the big decision that needed to be made. Because again, on a given night, you could get the saves. Like the Philadelphia game, I remember, wasn't even really a great win. I remember they weren't really happy with it. But it was still this persistent lack of trust in the goaltending that had reached a point past saving.
Yeah. They come back home after that Tampa Bay game, and they beat the Vegas Golden Knights in a shootout in spectacular fashion, 2-1, and that was Alexander Georgiev's eventual last home game. 2 nights later, in Dallas, they lose to the Dallas Stars. And then that next day is the trade with Jussi Sandinen for Scott Wedgwood. Am I going crazy? And I guess I could just look at it right here. Did Trent Miner start against the Oilers?
Um,
Oh, no. That was the shootout win against Vegas was Georgiev's last win at home. Scott Wedgwood does arrive in time. We talked to him before the game. They lose 4-1 to the Oilers. And there was this like, okay, well, is that how they're going to solve it? By bringing in Scott Wedgwood to be a good, good feel guy? And now we're into this segment, game 31 through 40. You have the Buffalo Sabres. December 3rd, the Avs fall behind 4-0. Come back and win 5-4 after Scott Wedgwood is put in net. Days later, Alexander Georgiev is traded. Mackenzie Blackwood comes in, and this is what I believe you were saying. For your money, is their best segment of the season.
My favorite segment, 7-2-1, and going month by month, which is a little odds and ends with the 10-game segment, but December was 10-3-0 for them. And a lot of it you credit to the change in net now with both goaltenders. It's their best segment, in my opinion. But you look at the PDO for this team. I think it's important because right now the overall is 986, 27th ranked. So this is a team that when you look at the luck metric, which measures save percentage and shooting percentage, you get an idea that this team has probably not always gotten the results maybe they deserve for process just on the whole of the season. And it's true, even of my favorite segment, they're still a 20th ranked team in terms of PDO at 995. They faced 67 high danger shots between both goaltenders. To peek ahead, in my least favorite segment, which is this most recent 10-game segment, Mackenzie Blackwood alone faced 66 high danger shots. So it gives you an idea of maybe what was happening in front of the goaltenders too that I like about this time. In terms of possession, 8th best possession team, but they had teams above them like Carolina, New Jersey, Florida, Dallas, so good teams. So I think they're in a good spot being in the top 10. In the scoring chances against all situations, 236.
And this is segments 31, game 31 through 40, right? Okay, perfect.
Best ranked team in the league in that segment in allowing the fewest scoring chances against. In terms of high danger chances against, 93, also best ranked in that category in allowing the fewest. In looking ahead at the least favorite segment, their scoring chances.
Can I pause you real fast? Yes. Just because I want to tie something together that you had talked about in the lead up to that segment that then bears itself out in the numbers you were just going over. What I think was making the start of this season, the first half of it, so frustrating for Abs fans, coaches, players, was that they were doing so many things right and the puck could not stay out of the back of their net. And that was what I thought. I remember feeling so refreshing about that segment that you're talking about, games 31 through 40, was, okay, all the good things that they're doing now, they're finally able to get rewarded for because they're getting the saves. And I think the numbers bear that out.
It does. And that's why side by side, it's important to see that in their worst segment, the numbers were worse, but not by some significant amount of difference. And so I think that's where you go back to PDO a little bit and expect this team to be rewarded a little bit in terms of results moving forward out of this least favorite 10-game segment. But similarly, it wasn't perfect defensive play, but it was good in describing along the fewest scoring chances against, the fewest high danger chances against. They were also providing goal support. In terms of goals for, they scored 36, which was 11 ranked. And in this recent segment that I don't like very much, 26 in goals for. So 10 goals less in this most recent 10-game segment. I do not like, 17 ranked around the league. It's important to compare the Abs not only to themselves, but also to what other teams were doing in their own 10-game segments around that time. I think it's why, too, it can fluctuate a little bit. And looking inside the group at the shooting percentage of individual players, I picked a couple off the top. McKinnon, in my favorite segment, 1176 shooting percentage. Makar, 1143. Rantanen, at a bit high, 1724. And Ross Colton, 3 goals in that 10-game segment at a 1765 shooting percentage. And Chushkin, also worth noting, played in these games 6 points in 8 games. We've been without Val Nichushkin over this most recent 10-game segment that I do not like, but I want to call out a couple things. McKinnon with 44 shots, which actually exceeded his shot attempts from the previous favorite 10-game segment, and an 1136 shooting percentage. So Nathan McKinnon, true to form, just doing exactly what he was doing well in the 10-game segment, possibly even better than before. Makar, 1304 shooting percentage. So similarly, probably doing even better in this most recent 10-game segment that I did not like. Rantanen's shooting percentage naturally regresses from that 17 to a 952. And Colton, only 1 goal in the most recent 10-game segment. His shooting percentage drops to a 5%. Obviously, different role, and it was a bit unsustainable. His was even at 1765 in the favorite 10-game segment. The reason I want to shout that out is to call attention to 2 things. One, it's important for Colton to get his game back on track. He returned from injury in early December, and he contributed right away. He brought energy, and he was obviously translating that into production at the time. That's grown a little bit quiet. I don't expect him to be at a 1765 shooting percentage every 10-game segment.
Who are you, Alex Tanguay?
But I do want him to find the middle ground between those two and get his game just a little bit more impactful as we've seen it before. That's the only reason why. Because similarly, Drouin, who I omit from these, because he's been absent. So his shooting percentage is wonky, but he's been impactful in both segments. When he plays, he helps this team. Drouin, another player that I think is worth mentioning. When you're without him, it makes a difference. When you have him, it helps this team. And similarly, Taves, in the recent 10-game segment that I do not love, his game does start to come around. His shooting percentage is low, but he has those 2 game-winning goals, 6 points in 10 games. This is a player who's contributing even when the team is struggling. And so I want to shout out that they have players who are doing what they're supposed to, especially at the top of the lineup. Special teams in the good segment, the power play was 17th ranked and the penalty kill was 12th. In this most recent segment that I hate.
Let me clarify. The good segment is games 31 through 40. The segment that Megan did not care for is 41 through 50, not the current 10-game segment that they are still in the middle of.
Yes. And so that is January 6th through January 25th. And it's honestly the whole of January that was a little bit tough for them. They go 7-6-2 in January. There are a couple things I want to talk about their January. And going back to special teams, it's interesting. In the January is maybe how I'll refer to it. The January segment. Power play is 32nd in the league. It's the worst rated power play at this time. And the PK has ascended to the 4th. They're getting good goaltending. This is a huge component in both of these segments.
Yeah.
Mackenzie Blackwood, since he's joined, I have his save percentage at the top. Let's see, 926. But even in the bad segment, the January segment, a 915 save percentage with the 7th best high danger save percentage, he experienced more rebounds than he is used to seeing. And that is something I want to talk about with, there's still room for improvement in my least favorite January segment with this team in terms of the shots faced. With Natural Stat Trick, they predicted around 11th most shots Mackenzie Blackwood faced over this January segment. I had with the NHL stats around 4th most face shots. Either way, that's a lot of shots in their own end, despite being still a strong possession team. In the January segment, 4th best possession, 5v5.
Nice.
Which then points to, all right, they're spending time in their own end, and it's limited, but it's costly when they do. And there's a lot of shots that are finding Mackenzie Blackwood. So one, that feels solvable. That feels like something that they can correct, especially seeing that they played decently well defensively in front of Blackwood-Wedgwood in the December segment after getting them. The quality of competition, I think, differs a little bit between the December and the January too. They had the Seattle game, the Anaheim game, the San Jose game, the Buffalo game come back, Nashville, Utah twice, they had Vancouver, and they beat Winnipeg 5-2 in the good 10-game segment. In the bad 10-game segment in January, it was the mix of up and down that we're allowed to feel unhappy with, but all right, they have got Florida, they've got Chicago. They should have won that game. They don't. They respond well in Minnesota. They drop Winnipeg. They get shut out. They come back close enough against New York, but it still didn't feel good. Lose to Edmonton, let it slip through their fingers. Yes. Get Dallas, drop Minnesota, drop Winnipeg, drop Boston.
Yep.
Okay. And obviously they just traded Mikko Rantanen in the Boston game. I'm giving them some allowances there. But honestly, I think the quality of the teams and the quality of the competition is a little bit steeper in their January, and it also included a few more games on the whole of the month in preparing for the Four Nations break. I've heard people say that I'm making excuses for them. I think it's important context that they had just a couple more games in their schedule leading up to the break in January.
I also, and this isn't specific to the Avs, but I do also think when doing all this evaluating, again, whether it be the Avalanche, the league, a specific team, I don't think you can't. I honestly even tie this to Sam Malinski's struggles. I don't think you can sell short how tough the schedule has been this year. And again, this is not specific to the Avalanche, but with this two plus week break here stuck in the middle of everything, it has changed the way that these schedules were put together, no doubt.
No, it certainly has. And so I was thinking a lot about what's been going wrong on the back end a little bit too, and how I have felt in my gut that Malinski is a player who is made better playing with a player like Gerard. And I know we saw a glimpse at Gerard Malinski a little earlier in the season when Manson was out of the lineup. I feel like my memory of that isn't as bad as people make it out to be. What I remember of that is that it just wasn't impactful, that he didn't do enough to solidify himself as a player who belonged in second pair conversations right now. But I don't think he actively hurt the team. He just wasn't helping them. And you expect that out of a second pair defenseman. And that's why seeing him with Gerard last night, I can see the difference then that a Malinski-DeHaan or Malinski-Middleton pairing holds him back a little bit. Because I was looking at like the scoring chances against and the possession numbers, which with the analytics I have access to, it's a little hard to measure because it doesn't account for the matchups and the minutes proportionate to those things. And so you have to kind of use your best judgment. Obviously, Taves and Makar as a pairing are getting not only tougher matchups, more ice time, so they're exposed to more scoring chances against.
Right.
But when I try to like mentally account for that, I don't think that Malinsky individually has been the liability, even during his bad points, that people make it out to be. I don't know that that is deserving of a second pair promotion. I just think they've got an interesting decision to make around how to get the most out of this player, because I think separately you don't hate Keaton Middleton, but you hate what Keaton Middleton does to Malinsky, and then you have to decide what matters more.
I really do. There's still so much season left. I think Sam Malinsky might benefit from this break more than anybody. I really do. I mean, just the difference in player that he has been recently. Let's say that. I don't want to say right now. Truthfully, I didn't even love his game last night. He found a way to contribute. One time that counted, one time that didn't. So good on him, but I still didn't even love his game from last night. But my thing with Sam Malinsky is he's such a different player right now than what he was for the first month and a half of the season. When we talked about that group being able to help keep the team afloat, I'm talking about him. He was someone that on the back end was such a welcomed surprise. And, you and I talked about it on a show a couple days ago. They were pairing him with Devon Taves a couple times, like to get Devon Taves going. They were saying, hey, skate with Sam Malinsky. He does the right things. I do think that he is going to greatly benefit from some time off here, because I do think he's better than what we've seen recently. I think he is being affected by this schedule maybe more than anyone else, just in the sense that it's his first full NHL season. The schedule is more grueling than normal. A lot of that stuff. Sam Malinsky is someone that I do think can be part of the solution here, but he's got to be able to hit a reset and get back closer to that play that we saw in those first 10, 20 game segments than what we've seen the last 20.
Well, and I think a good player can overcome the problem that I'm outlining here, but there is still a problem of if the way that Malinsky gets opportunities moving forward is on a third pairing with a Middleton, it's going to be hard to overcome that. And again, a good player will. So I won't hold it against him, but I think the sides of his game that have been muted this year, to include when he was playing well, have been the puck moving offensive upside. He's been very good defensively, especially in the good parts. And I remember him talking about the 10-game segments, and after the evaluation of the second 10-game segment, there were things shown to him that affirmed what he was doing well, that helped to boost his confidence and inspire good habits moving forward. And I think that's what I worry, is the sides of his game that have been muted are best complemented by a player like Girard. And so you're not really going to see it complemented by a player like Middleton. There are puck skill limitations, not just with Middleton, but with DeHaan as well.
Yeah.
And it's hard because you've got a player who moves the puck well and you just want to see him thrive. So they've got a tough situation with how they're currently constructed.
So here's the question. Where are they at? Where are they at right now as we head? Again, let's just for the sake of the conversation, pretend like the game tonight isn't happening. Where are they at heading into this break from your perspective, Megan?
Well, in terms of what they can clean up defensively, they're actually in a great spot. I won't describe this as the best, strongest defensive team around, but in terms of what I didn't like from the least favorite 10-game segment, it's things that they can improve upon. Despite allowing more high danger chances against, more rebounds, they're still a good 5v5 possession team all the time. That's just kind of their identity. So it means that the time spent in their own end is going to be costly, and they need to be extra careful then in how they defend in their own end. It emphasizes an importance in net front coverage. And so that means having physical D that move bodies out of the net, getting sticks in lanes, selling out to block shots, clearing pucks. But it starts with how they defend against entries too. And that means on-time arrivals, getting back quickly to try and keep players to the perimeter and gapping up on them, playing the body if you need to, and just generally making it harder for them to get to inside ice. I think that starts with what this team I feel is doing well right now, and that's stabilizing, like getting into that identity. I think a lot of the players that are there already know it, but it is important for them to know their role, because defensive breakdowns happen when, in an effort to help out a skater who is trying to defend in their own end, maybe they're losing a puck battle, they collapse and they want to provide support. And sometimes I think they abandon an assignment to do that, and they need to trust their teammates. They only need to address the breakdowns and the lost battles if they come. They shouldn't be anticipating them and abandoning assignments to do that. And that points to a lack of trust. And it's a lack of trust in the structure and each other. And I just want to see them trust each other. And honestly, then, in looking ahead at like the offensive struggles of the team, it feels similar, because when they've injected something new and different in Netches, they start to get goal scoring from that top line. So you're looking at the rest of the lineup like, okay, well, how are they going to contribute? And I think it's going to become a matter of trusting each other, because again, they're still controlling the puck in the offensive zone. They're just not making great decisions with it, whether that be overpassing or blocked shots because their lane just wasn't the right one. And I think that's going to come down to trusting each other a little bit more and better anticipating what your teammates do well and what their strengths are. And with a little consistency in terms of lines, it'll be easier for them to do that coming out of the break.
I think trust is such an interesting word that maybe we haven't used enough, because you've heard me talk about what I see with this team, in that this version of the Avalanche doesn't quite know who they are yet. And I think it's an interesting thing that you bring up there, saying this group doesn't quite feel like they trust each other to the extent that maybe we've seen past Avalanche teams, in recent memory. And, this kind of, because that to me was the beauty of the 2022 team. Did not matter who was out there on the ice together. Did not matter if Jared Bednar was mixing up the lines, if you had injuries, if you had a player called up, if you had a player going out. Every group, every combination of players was just so in tune, so in sync, that it didn't matter if you had Alex Newhook out there with Nathan McKinnon and Logan O'Connor, or if you had Andrew Cogliano out with Andre Burakovsky and Mikko Rantanen. I'm just making up combinations. But, there was just a fluidity to the game and an instinctual trust that they had in each other. And it's part of the reason why, this game tonight does exist. I'd love to see them end this portion of the season on a high note, where I thought last night was a really good game for the team, not just in the sense that they needed the points. That felt like a team building moment, to use, corporate jargon. That was a great team builder for them, where it was just this, hey, Marty's our guy. He can fill that role. There's no more questions. He can be a big time player. Sam Malinsky gets the big hat after the game, and you and I were saying, like, that felt like a leadership move. Hey, Marty Netjes, 3 points, 2 goals. You're going to get the hat plenty. Tonight, Sam Malinsky had to battle to get on the score sheet, and he did in a big way late in the game, and that ends up being a goal that really kind of crushes any comeback hopes that the Calgary Flames might have had. And I do sit there and say, I don't think that one game last night's enough to turn everything in the right direction, and now suddenly they're going, but can you build on that? And can you start to build that trust that Marty Netjes is one of the guys, Jack Drury is one of the guys, they're part of this team, and this is the group that you've got. I think part of the reason that we saw a bump in what you referred to as your favorite segment of play was the vote of confidence from management. Hey, you guys are doing the right things. We're going to go out and get the goalies that you guys deserve. And I think that meant a lot to the group. And now they've got to find a way to give themselves that boost again. And I do wonder if a game like last night can be the start of moving them in the direction of what you just talked about, Megan, of can this group get on the same page, and can they trust each other, and can everyone be bought into their role and what is being asked of them to the level that a cup contender needs. And this all harkens back to what you and I talked about off the top, that if you can get that buy-in from this group, And it feels like we're starting to get a clearer picture of what the group is, because for so much of this season, it's been a kind of revolving door in so many different areas. And, you mentioned the constant changing of the lines, especially up front for the forwards. You're playing with someone different every night for so much of the season. Can you start to get the consistency with that? Can you start to build not necessarily even chemistry on the ice, but just chemistry among this group? Can you start to get some consistency in who the faces are that are in that locker room? And can you start to build that trust from one player to the next? And if this team can do that, and Chris MacFarland can go out and make a couple tweaks, I think you're really happy with where this team is at right now. This team is a team that they just need to get in. They don't need to go out and win the division. They need to get in, and if they're hitting their stride at the right time and coming together and coalescing as a group at the right time, Megan, for me, I'll be the one to say it. The Colorado Avalanche are a Stanley Cup contender. I know people have recently, especially since the Mikko Rantanen trade, have tried to say that, they're not, it's pulled them out of that. This group is a contender for the Stanley Cup right now. They've got to do the things that you just talked about. Chris MacFarland has a little bit more work to do. They could easily win a Stanley Cup this year.
I think the significance, too, in talking about team building is this is a really tight group. They get along very well, and it's a great locker room right now. And so it is a matter of the on-ice group coming together and being able to make how they play second nature to each other. And to your point, operating off of instinct, because I do think they're super comfortable with each other as people. But now it's a matter of understanding each other's individual strengths.
This is a great point.
Ross Colton, Miles Wood, they understand what the other does well. But Jack Drury has now been brought into the fold. And so they need to get to know each other as players. And it's not so much that they abandon their own identity and their own personal strengths, but it is important for the success of a line for them to be able to understand what their teammates do well and work within, I don't even want to say those constraints, but when you look at a line like OC, Kiviranta, and Kelly, who've been together now for some time, I think their issue has been they're committed to the defensive side of the game. And I think that they've got that part on lock now. Mm-hmm. I want to see them explore what they can do together offensively.
The word you just used of instinctual, I think, is such a good call out because, Megan, what I maybe can boil to one short sentence of what I think has overall been the reason that the Avs have felt different this year. It seems they've looked different. There's too much thinking going on out there.
Yes.
I think that's maybe the easiest way to boil down a lot of what you were just talking about. And like I said, when I step back and see the 10,000-foot view of the season, it's like, yeah, they're all out there thinking too much.
And to their defense, they were thinking too much earlier in the year because they didn't trust their goaltending.
Correct.
And it didn't serve them very well.
Right.
They have to undo that trauma response now. It is safe.
Yeah.
It is safe back in net.
It's safe back there.
You can take risks again, which is why I like Netchis.
Right.
Because he doesn't have that trauma. He didn't come with that baggage. So he's like, this is fun.
He's playing north. I really do. I think if this group can, I think instinctual is the right word. If they can play more off instinct and trust the process out there with this new look group. It is, you and I were joking the other day, the pictures that are floating around out there of the Stanley Cup photo on the ice and all the grayed out players and all that stuff.
Stop.
It's a new group for sure. But if this group can come together and get to that instinctual level of hockey, I think this group has an opportunity to do some damage and be dangerous, because I think there are some people out there that are saying, oh, their window's closed, they're done, they're not a real threat anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe for the first time in a while, they've got the chance to maybe catch some folks off guard.
Yeah, because they started the season that way. We knew they were going to be underestimated with how depleted they were. And they're a wild card team. And so people see the wild card place in the standings and they probably continue on about their day.
Yeah.
But the Avs, in terms of what they actually have on paper, are better than a wild card team. The performance has been met with that result. But in terms of who they have, look at the season Nathan MacKinnon is having. Again, in his best and worst 10-game segments as a team, he's still a consistently good player who has the ability to impact the game on a nightly basis. Cale Makar included in that. Devon Toews looking more and more like himself every game. To your point, I think people will continue to underestimate the Avs, and that's fine. But more continuity and more reps is only going to be better for this team. I'm excited to see where it goes, and I'm excited to see a player like Nitsch's hopefully rub off on them in ways like it's okay to take some risks. Actually, you have a lot more stability in net now, and it's okay to return to taking some risks.
And I do wonder if him being able to jump straight into that leadership core he's going to be able to have that message, with a little bit more weight behind it. We're going to wrap up today's show with a pair of super chats here. First from Vaguely Sober, $1.99. Enjoy the break. You as well, Vaguely. Enjoy the sober. I almost just said enjoy the break. Vaguely Sober. We will be here, regularly scheduled programming, but no, it will be nice to have a little bit of a break here right in the middle of the season. This is definitely the time of year where it can feel like you get a little bit of burnout, because it just feels like the schedule is so compressed. So it will be nice to get a break. Everyone, yes, enjoy the break. And then from Bobby Ballantyne, excited to read the Bednar piece, $4.99 from Bobby. Excited to read the Bednar piece. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills when fans blame our coaching. All the guy does is win at every level. Love, Bedsy. Yes, no, thank you very much for the super chat. Both of you, highly encourage everyone, head on over to guerrillasports.net. Check out the piece on Jared Bednar. We do have a new website coming, just so everyone knows, being completely revamped and refreshed. So I'm looking forward to that. But you can head on over. Link is over on the Guerrilla Sports Twitter page. Megan's tweeted out. I've tweeted out. Go check it out. I read it this morning. It's fantastic. Great work as always, Megan.
Thank you.
Megan, any final thoughts for you? And again, like I said, there is still one more game tonight that you and I will talk about tonight. But just any final thoughts from you on what we've seen from the Avs so far in the first half plus?
Well, they'll really embarrass us if they go out and just stink up the place.
Seriously.
They need to reclaim some pride in this Edmonton series. So, look, I know it's the last game before the break. I have so much confidence about this team coming out of it, but it doesn't mean I won't be very grumpy if they don't throw everything at the Oilers tonight.
There's nothing to hold back.
Yeah, you're getting 2 weeks, kind of. Sorry, Nate, Cale, Lecky.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, Connor McDavid, same thing. As Draisaitl's done in Germany
there's
playing.
Still a points race to compete for and care about. And honestly, I don't think Nathan McKinnon needs to be told to care about that.
Well, and my last thing with this game tonight is they kind of embarrassed you on home ice. You gave up a 3-goal lead.
Yeah. You wasted a Nathan McKinnon 2-goal night, an LOC goal. It's inexcusable.
Right. I did put out a tweet a little bit earlier, guys. I will be doing a mailbag this weekend. It's been a while since we've had a mailbag out, so head on over to my Twitter and drop your questions in there. That will be either tomorrow or Sunday coming out. So drop your questions, and we'll get to those. Like I said, we'll probably do that tomorrow, and we'll drop either tomorrow or Sunday. So make sure you get your guys' questions in today. That's going to do it. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. Chloe Thiel behind the glass. Make sure you guys are checking out the new piece from Meghan Angley on Jared Bednar over on guerrillasports.net. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, hanging out with us all week. We'll be back next week. 2 more episodes of Off Ice and episode number 2 of Pucks and Prosecco with Megan and Chloe. Thank you guys so much. We will talk to you later. Have a great weekend.